GMOs are a manipulation of nature, and the long-term consequences for their use is still unknown, okay? We want to have all the facts when we're making decisions about what we're putting in our children's bodies. So as mentioned, GMOs only entered the scene on my birthday. Not really on my birthday, but in the 1980s. So we really don't know how their consumption is going to affect our health long-term. Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents, and welcome back to another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. Today, we are tackling a question that pops up a lot, especially with all the rising food costs. Do we really need to buy organic? You know, with all that buzz there's around organic food, it can really be tough to know if it's truly worth it. Is it truly worth all of that extra cost? Is it really better for our kids, especially those with ADHD, or is it all just marketing hype? So don't worry, we're going to break it all down for you. We're going to look at the pros and cons in today's episode. We are going to look at what the science says. We're going to look at how it all might affect your child's health. So grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's chat about whether or not organic is really necessary. Now, if you're new here, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. I'm Dana Kay. I'm a board-certified health and nutrition practitioner, and I specialize in working with families of kids with ADHD and helping those families find natural solutions to reduce those ADHD symptoms. I get asked about organic versus non-organic all the time. You know, families want to know if they have to buy organic for their kids with ADHD, and I totally understand why they are asking, because it can be expensive, okay? Now, as we get started, you might be curious what it actually means for a product to be certified organic. So let's start there. I think that's a really good place. In essence, it means that these products are grown or raised on farms that do not use any prohibited substances like synthetic fertilizers, like pesticides, sewage sludge. I know that sounds pretty gross, or genetic engineering. Organic farmers use only natural processes on their farm. So when we buy organic, we can be more confident that we are not eating genetically modified ingredients or eating toxic chemicals. For more information about what makes a product organic, you can check out a fact sheet that's from the USDA that I'm actually going to include in the show notes below. It actually describes in detail the practices organic farmers must use to prevent these pests and weeds, that they must use to rotate their crops and raise and feed livestock. But in essence, you can know that if you're buying organic, you're buying produce that hasn't been covered in pesticides or that are genetically modified. Now, what's the big deal about genetically modified ingredients? Okay, these are called GMOs. So let's just camp out here for a bit. So GMO stands for genetically modified organisms. They're living organisms whose genetic material has been artificially manipulated in a lab setting. And this is done through genetic engineering, where plant, animal, bacterial, or virus genes are combined in a way that does not naturally occur in our environment or otherwise. Okay, so farmers have been modifying plants for thousands of years through selective breeding and crossbreeding. Now, as you can imagine, this is a relatively slow way to modify plants and animals. Genetic modification, however, is much quicker and more targeted. It has only been around since the 1980s. 1980, the year that I was born. Yes, I am now 44. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Anyway, that's a tangent. But that with the 1980s was when the first GMO product actually entered the market. Insulin for diabetes. Okay. In 1994, the FDA approved the first GMO tomato, claiming it was just as safe as those traditionally bred. Now, following the tomato came other GMO plants: summer squash, soybeans, cotton, corn, papayas, potatoes, and canola. So, look, this is a relatively new process when you really break it down. In 2005, alfalfa and sugar beets were added to the list of genetically modified products. Then 10 years later, a genetically modified salmon was released into the market. I mean, I was totally geeking out when I went back and researched this topic. Now, and finally, in 2017, apples were added to the list of GMOs. You might have noticed in recent years the term bioengineered on some food labels. That's because in 2016, the Congress actually passed a law requiring some foods to contain this particular label. Some foods, not all. That seems a bit strange. So GMOs are created using 4 steps. Number 1 is to identify the appealing gene in the original organism. Number 2 is copy that information from that gene. Number 3 is insert that genetic information into another organism. And number 4 is grow a new organism. You know, it sounds simple when you boil it down to those 4 steps, but it's actually quite a scientific process and definitely something that cannot occur naturally. So let's look at the pros first. We'll dive into those. Most GMOs fall into one of 2 categories: herbicide tolerant or pesticide producing. Okay, herbicide tolerant or pesticide producing. So let's start with herbicide tolerant plants. They can withstand herbicide so the farmer can kill weeds without hurting the plant. Pesticide producing plants produce their own pesticides so the farmer doesn't have to spray them. This is definitely one benefit of GMOs, as farmers are able to significantly reduce their use of chemical insecticides. So many farmers, especially those in lower income countries, work without protective shoes or glasses or clothing. And when you think about that constant onslaught of chemicals from pesticides, often this makes the farmers very sick. But by using these GMO seeds, these farmers can reduce or completely eliminate some of the use of the dangerous pesticides. So from the farmer's perspective, GMOs seem health conscious. They seem very convenient and efficient. After all, when using GMOs, farmers are able to actually produce more plants with fewer resources and also protecting themselves from harmful pesticides in the process and saving them money and time. There are fewer crops destroyed by insects or weeds, and they often have high cropped yield, which equates to more income. And it seems like a win-win. So high crop yield means that, they're obviously producing more at a lesser cost, so they're going to get more income. So it's a total win-win for the farmers. Okay, but now we're going to go into the cons. Is it possible there might be more to the story? So I want to talk about the cons, okay? GMOs are a manipulation of nature, and the long-term consequences for their use is still unknown, okay? We want to have all the facts when we're making decisions about what we're putting in our children's bodies. So as mentioned, GMOs only entered the scene on my birthday, not really on my birthday, but in the 1980s. So we really don't know how their consumption is going to affect our health long term. We also don't know how they will affect our planet or our animals. Okay, remember, GMOs, in essence, are manufactured plants. They can't be found anywhere in nature. Nowhere. They are created in labs and then pushed on to consumers many times without our knowledge. They are created for a number of reasons, including, as I mentioned previously, the ability to withstand herbicide or insecticide application. And as mentioned, when GMOs are pesticide producing, farmers are able to reduce or even eliminate their usage of pesticides. Most would agree that is a good thing. But what about herbicide-tolerant GMOs? Because plants are herbicide-tolerant, some farmers actually use more herbicides because the herbicides no longer hurt their crops. They kill the weeds alone. That means that though we might be reducing the amount of insecticides because of GMOs, we're actually increasing the amount of herbicides. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about glyphosate. This is a really deep down and dirty podcast, isn't it? We're going deep into GMOs and organic. Now, glyphosate is one of the most widely used herbicides in the world. Studies have suggested that glyphosate is a possible carcinogen. That means it's capable of causing cancer. So with the introduction and widespread use of GMOs, our country is now flooded with a carcinogenic weed killer. Okay, I think we can all agree this is a major concern with GMOs. Along with herbicide-tolerant and pesticide-producing GMOs, other GMOs are created to ensure a longer shelf life. I understand why the food industry, would like to increase the shelf life, more profit, of course, but I have to wonder what benefit a longer shelf life is to us as consumers. Okay, sure, I guess that means, we can buy produce and it won't go moldy for weeks. It enables us to shop less often and have food that lasts longer in our fridges. But is that really what we want? Just ask yourself that question. A tomato that won't go bad for weeks. My rule of thumb is that if it's something that doesn't spoil, it's probably way too processed. I can understand a consumer's desire to make their produce last longer. Is it worth the cost to our health, to our children's health? To me, it's not, and so I want to arm you guys, listeners out there, with all the knowledge you need to make that choice for you. I would rather have to shop more often for my produce and know it's not dangerous for my family than to shop less often but remain unsure of the damage to our health. Now, at this time, there is a lot of consumer doubt. There's a lot of confusion and issues within the GMO industry. Now, in the United States, 3 federal agencies regulate the use of GMOs. So we've got the US Food and Drug Administration, they're the FDA. We've got the US Environmental Protection Agency, which is the EPA. And then we've finally got the US Department of Agriculture, which is the USDA. These agencies claim GMOs are safe for consumption, but are they really? I will tell you on a side note, these agencies also claim that artificial colors are safe for our children, but let's not go there. There's another episode of the podcast that I've definitely dived into that one. These organizations are the same one who refuses to ban ingredients that other countries have banned because of their significant health concerns. I, for one, don't fully trust them. I'm sorry, but I want to make sure what I'm eating is actually safe. Also, how can they really know? When we are only a few decades into GMO consumption, it's not possible to be certain they pose no long-term health risks, okay? I want to actually tell you, in the UK, they produce no GMO produce in the UK. But why are we doing it here in the US? Some evidence has actually suggested, they do know about that. That's exactly why the UK don't do it. That's why there are over 60 countries worldwide that require companies to label GMO products. In 2018, Congress passed a new law requiring some labeling of genetically modified organisms. Some labeling, as I said earlier, not all labeling. Many products contain GMOs, includes labels reading bioengineered or something similar to that. But unfortunately, there are many exemptions to this law, including meat from animals that have been fed with GMO feed and food sold in restaurants. Restaurants can use GMOs without having to tell the consumer in any way. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit heated. You can tell that I'm definitely very passionate about this subject, but, restaurants, you go into one, you're completely blind, but this labeling is definitely a step in the right direction. Don't get me wrong. A consumer, I personally don't think it's good enough. A consumer should know what they are eating at all times. They shouldn't have to guess or read between the lines. Labels should be clear 100% of the time. And then we as consumers can make the choice for our own family's health. So in the USA, the following crops that I'm going to list out now, if you want to write them down, if you want to press pause, go and get a pen. These are the ones that are genetically modified. So we've got corn, we've got soybeans, cotton, sugar beets, alfalfa, apples, canola, potatoes, eggplant, papaya, a pineapple, salmon, and squash. So it's not an extensive list, but there's a list, and you know it. These products find their way into many, dare I say, most of the food we eat in the United States. But according to the FDA in 2018, GMO soybeans, made up 94% of all soybeans planted. GMO cotton made up 94% of all cotton planted. And 92% of corn planted was GMO. This is different to sweet corn, okay? I just want to make that proviso there. There's corn and there's sweet corn, but this was normal corn. 92% of crops planted was GMO. It's the same story with canola and sugar beets. If you are eating anything that contains soy, corn, canola, cotton, and sugar beets, this includes granulated sugar, you are very likely consuming a genetically modified crop. What's worse, many of these GMO plants are used to make other ingredients that are often used in packaged foods. So, look for ingredients like cornstarch or corn syrup. We talk about, high fructose corn syrup, granulated sugar, soybean oil, corn oil, soy lecithin, cottonseed oil, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, and sweeteners, just to name a few. Consumers can't avoid GMOs by avoiding GMO produce alone. They have to also avoid any product made with the produce. And here in the United States, that is quite a large number of products, okay? GMOs are hidden in our food supply in mass amounts. In particular, they like to linger in processed foods, okay? Yep, processed foods, that's where they hide. Restaurants, too, are GMO minefields. So unless, of course, they serve organic produce, which is not that many, and animal products. Most, in my experience, definitely do not. I think I've probably seen only a handful of restaurants that serve only organic food. Now, what's the big deal? Okay, why does this even matter? You're probably wondering. Yes, I'm getting very passionate about it, but how is this going to affect me and my child? There might not be a huge amount of credible human studies on the health effects of GMOs, but there is plenty of evidence to recognize many of the risks associated with regular consumption of these lab-derived food-like substances. We talked about that herbicide. The primary concern is the increase of that glyphosate, that herbicide usage. There is research that suggests that the increase of GMOs resulting in the increase of herbicides can be detrimental to our health. Some of those health concerns include stomach issues, gastrointestinal disorders, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression, autism, ADHD, infertility, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, kidney disease, osteoporosis, cancer, and so many other. Okay, there are no long-term studies showing the safety of genetically modified organisms. They've only been in our food supply since the 1990s. We don't know what damage they might be doing to us long-term. What we do know, however, is that many diseases are on the rise since their introduction in the 1990s, okay? The early 1990s, when GMOs really hit the market, Americans have grown sicker and sicker. Food allergies, autism, ADHD, reproductive issues, cancer, diabetes, heart conditions, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease. These have all become more and more common. Health concerns are rising, Now, admittedly, there are likely several factors involved in the increase of diseases, not just GMOs, but GMOs are likely playing a role as well. When we consume GMOs, we are participating in the only long-term safety trial ever conducted in humans. Seriously, just think about that. We're participating in the only long-term safety trial ever conducted in humans. I don't know about you, but I don't like the idea of participating in this study. And I most definitely do not like the idea of signing my children up to participate either. But every time I grab a non-organic product that contains soy, corn, or one of the other plants previously mentioned, I am doing that. We don't know how safe or how dangerous GMOs are. I, for one, would rather not take that risk. Okay, Whew, that's a lot, isn't it? I know. But how can we make sure we're not eating GMOs if you choose to not eat GMOs for your family? The way we do that is by choosing to buy organic products. This is one of the main reasons I buy as much organic food as I can, because I know that by buying organic, I'm protecting my family from any potential ill effects of GMOs. Now, what if you can't afford to buy everything organic? I can't buy everything organic. I don't, but if you can, amazing. But if you can't, there is some good news. So don't worry. You don't have to buy all organic all the time. If you can, it's definitely cleaner to eat as much organic as possible. But if you can't afford to eat all organic, there are some things that you can do to save money. You've probably heard me talk about the EWG, or the Environmental Working Group. They release a clean 15 and a dirty dozen list every year. And it basically tells us as consumers which crops have the most pesticides and which have the least. They released their 2024 lists a couple of months ago, so I'm going to add the links to those lists in the show notes, so definitely check them out. But what are you going to do with this list? Why do they matter? What does it all mean? They are one of the best ways to avoid exposure to toxic pesticides, and it tells you which foods you need to buy organic. I tell all of the families that I work with, if a food is on the dirty dozen list, you need to buy organic or not buy it at all, because these fruits and veggies have shown to be the most contaminated with those harmful pesticides. The foods that are on the clean 15, though, don't necessarily need to be organic. Every family's budget is different. Some families, as I said, can afford to buy all organic. And if that's you, that's great. Keep it up. But others can't afford to buy everything. And that's totally okay. Stick to organic when you purchase foods on the dirty dozen. But don't worry if you buy organic for the foods on the clean 15. One thing I really love about the EWG is that they provide a downloadable, printable cheat sheet that you can take with you to the grocery store that has, both the dirty dozen list and the clean 15 list on it. Okay. You can get this free list by putting in your email address at one of the links that I'm going to provide below to the EWG in the show notes. But I seriously take this list with me everywhere, because it does change from year to year. But I will tell you, strawberries is always on there. And so I keep it in my bag because it's so helpful. Now, on the same topic, I also want to share about a new study that was just recently released that showed that many popular gluten-free brands are actually pretty contaminated with pesticides and other harmful substances. I'm going to add the link to that article in the show notes as well, so you can read it in full. But basically, there is an organization called Mums Across America, and they tested 46 samples of gluten-free foods, including bread, pasta, crackers, snacks, flour, dessert mixes, and chips. So they tested these foods for glyphosate, for pesticides, minerals, and also gluten. Even though they were gluten-free foods, they tested that as well. And the results were actually pretty disturbing. Now, the director, Zen Honeycutt, summarized the results, and I'm going to share that with you here. So Zen said, okay, this is quoting, "We had hoped to find that gluten-free foods that were also organic would be free of glyphosate and pesticides. They were not. The prevalence of glyphosate and agrochemicals in our food supply, even in organic and even in foods made for people with American Disability Act recognized disability, like celiac, okay, that's part of that act, is disturbing for many reasons. This contamination is avoidable. As the EU has done, all our policymakers need to do is disallow the spraying of glyphosate and other agrochemicals as a drying agent on crops. The result would be that 80% of our exposure to glyphosate would be eliminated from food consumption. We urge food manufacturers to join us in calling for better regulation of the food supply." Yes, completely agree with what she said. Now, a few other key findings included the following that I'm going to share with you. 44 out of the 46 of the samples came back positive for glyphosate. Out of the 237 pesticides they tested for, glyphosate was actually the most prevalent. The highest level of glyphosate in gluten-free food tested was in Bunza chickpea pasta. And the only two products without any detectable levels of glyphosate were Lesser Evil popcorn and Edward and Son rice crackers. King Arthur's gluten-free flour and Milton's sea salt crackers had the highest level of pesticide chemicals across the board. The samples were all extremely low in minerals, meaning that they are offering very little nutritional value, okay? They're literally like eating cardboard, basically. 3 out of 46 samples that they checked for gluten, namely Simple Meals brownie mix, Made Good soft double-baked chocolate cookies, Simple Meals almond flour crackers, and had levels above the FDA allowable 20 ppm of gluten and should be legally recalled. So what that means is they tested 46 samples and 3 of them out of that 46 actually had detectable levels of gluten when they were a gluten-free product, okay? And when you've got something like celiac, okay, when you've got non-celiac gluten sensitivity, yes, it causes inflammation in your body. And if you're not eating it that much, it doesn't really, it's not going to be hugely detrimental. But if you've got celiac and you're relying on a product that says gluten-free and it's not, that's really, really dangerous. It's crazy that there's got gluten in it. It's so dangerous for those with celiac or, even a gluten allergy or a wheat allergy. So according to these findings, even buying organic does not guarantee you are not being exposed to pesticides. But I want you, don't stress out. You're like, what are we going to eat? It does definitely lower your risk load or lower your toxic load. So what I always tell my clients is if you can afford to buy organic, do it because it's definitely worth it. It's worth the investment. But again, if you can't buy everything organic, at least consider buying items on the Dirty Dozen list that are organic. Every little step we make, every little, reduction in toxic exposure is a step in the right direction, okay? I hope that you found this podcast helpful. I have loved researching it for you. I'm really passionate about this. And if you feel that you're as passionate as me about this topic, share this episode far and wide. The more that we can get out there, share our voices to the world that this is not okay. GMOs are not okay. Pesticides are not okay. Herbicides are not okay. Glyphosate's not okay. Guys, I just want to say thank you for joining me today. I hope that you now have a better understanding of whether or not it's really necessary to buy organic products and also which ones are the most important to buy organic and which ones you can skip if you need to cut the costs. If you found this helpful, as always, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with other families who might benefit from this information. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.